I'm so happy to see so many people, hundreds of people actually, from all over the world. I see people from Dubai here. I see people from, even people from Israel are with us at this late hour. It's 2:30 a.m. Israel time. With your permission, what I'd like to do is share with you some slides, and then I promised Debbie that we will allow enough time for questions today so that we can really utilize the time that we have together in the most efficient way. So I'm sure that this is now the seventh day of the war, and I'm sure that the question that is on your minds as well as on my mind is, what's the end game? What's how this is going to end? And I'll try to answer that question. But first, let's try to understand, how did we get here, right? There are many, many different motivations involved, many things that happened since 10/7, even before 10/7. How did we get here? So the most important thing that happened is that Iran's deterrence, and we spoke about the meaning of deterrence in this forum before. Deterrence means the ability to make sure that your adversaries, that your enemies don't do certain things because they're afraid of you, because they're afraid of your capabilities, because they are concerned of what you're capable of doing. That's the meaning of deterrence. Now, Iran's deterrence was significantly decreased as a result of 10/7. Right before 10/7, Iran cultivated the Ring of Fire doctrine. The Ring of Fire doctrine was the number one threat to Israel's existence in the eyes of many Israelis and in the eyes of many people that analyze the situation in the Middle East. And the Ring of Fire included several elements. We'll talk about that. And then Iran did something that was unexpected. It defied a direct order from the United States not to intervene in the war between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah. And twice in 2024, Iran intervened, attacked Israel directly in April and October. Between these two attacks, and I believe that we had one session at least with this forum about those attacks. Between the two attacks, between April and October of 2024, they fired 521 items, most of them ballistic missiles and drones. The interception ratio was about 98%, and the damage was minimal. In the effort to intercept, you had the United States, United Kingdom, you had Saudi Arabia, you had the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It was a very impressive U.S. coordinated effort to help Israel to intercept those 521 missiles. That exposed Iran in two ways. The first, it exposed its real military capabilities. Secondly, it allowed Israel to respond militarily. Now, Israel's response, which took place several weeks after the second attack, was not widely reported. There is an element in diplomacy known as deniability. What is deniability? This is what happened, for example, between Israel and Syria. In 2006, according to international press, Israel discovered that the Syrians are building a nuclear reactor that was provided to them by North Korea, and the Israelis decided to take it out, but they didn't say a word about it. And the Syrians didn't say a word about it. And so as long as both sides are not celebrating and not talking about it, it's as if it didn't happen. So same thing happened with Israel's response to the Iranian direct attack in October and April of 2024. Israel practically took out most of Iran's air defense systems. This was not widely reported. The Iranians did not talk about it. The Israelis, I mean, some of them did talk about it. After all, it is Israel. You can't expect Israeli politicians not to say anything. But the damage to Iran's air defense system was dramatic. It meant that Iran is completely exposed, and you see it today. Today, you see how exposed Iran is to Israeli air attacks or potentially to American air attacks. The second factor that brings us to this point, so the first is the failure of the Ring of Fire doctrine. The immediate implication of it is that Iran lost as a result of their ill-advised intervention, lost their ability to defend themselves from the air. The second factor is Iran's failure to read Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not interested in the Middle Eastern bazaar, which is what the Iranians are known for. Middle Eastern bazaar means that signing an agreement, in Western civilization, an agreement is an institution in our culture, right? We sign an agreement, it means the negotiations end. Not in the Middle East. In the Middle East, the moment you sign the agreement is when the negotiations begin, right? And so they completely misread President Trump, who gave them 60 days to come to the table and close a deal, and they just ignored it. And President Trump, in response, according to reports, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know. I just have to rely on reports, gave Israel the green light to attack. The third factor, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which usually, Israel has lots of complaints about the IAEA's ability to monitor and to report and to be strict over the years regarding Iran's nuclear program. They issued a report, basically a damning report, blaming Iran of violating basically every agreement and every item that was agreed upon. And that damning report is what really triggered the red light in the minds of Israeli decision makers and the Americans. Now, the fourth factor is misreading the Israelis after 10/7. And if you remember, right after 10/7, we had a Zoom call here that was, and I know that video was viewed by thousands of people. When I said after 10/7, Israeli mindset is different. Israel is not going to accept existential threats anymore. And this was before Israel took out Hezbollah. We said it right here. We said if Israel learned something from what happened on 10/7 in the South, is that we cannot sit idly by when our enemies are building military capacity that is designed to destroy Israel. And so Israel will not sit idly by. It's not going to happen anymore. And the Iranians didn't get that memo. They didn't get that memo. They didn't get the message that after 10/7, things are different, right? And then lastly, you have, of course, the motivation, the political motivation, which we can't, when you look at the history of every war, there's always a political motivation. There's always a political factor, right? And in this case, you have a government in Israel that is determined to do something to either compensate or eclipse the calamity of 10/7, and 10/7 was a calamity. The worst thing that happened to our people since the Holocaust. So what is Iran's fantasy, the Ring of Fire? The idea was that not only Hamas will attack from the south, but the attack of 10/7 was to be a trigger for several efforts simultaneously to try and destroy Israel, assuming that this will do two things. It will weaken Israeli society from within, because the Israeli society was already debating the so-called judicial reform. It will also prevent the progress Israel was making under the auspices of the United States of normalizing ties with Saudi Arabia, which is really the holy grail of the Middle East today. And I'll explain why if you'd like to during the Q&A session. So the Ring of Fire included several elements: Hamas from the south, Hezbollah from the north, pro-Iranian militias from the Golan Heights, pro-Hamas groups in the West Bank. And by the way, when I say Hamas, also keep in mind Islamic Jihad is a significant organization, is working together with Hamas. Houthis from Yemen. The Houthis are much larger in number than Hezbollah, much larger than Hamas. They are armed and equipped with ballistic missiles. And of course, lastly, the idea was to have also Arab Israelis rioting against Israel. That fantasy, what we call the Ring of Fire, did not happen. And it did not happen for several reasons. I believe that one of the reasons it did not happen is because of the way Hamas executed 10/7, the celebration, the fact that they uploaded all those images, the fact that they killed scores of Muslims. That one video that I remember mentioning here did a lot of damage to the Iranian fantasy of Ring of Fire. And then, of course, the way that Israel took out Hezbollah, which was very impressive, very methodological, was prepared for years. The same thing happened with Iran. It's the same doctrine. You begin with the decapitation of the leadership, of the upper echelon of the military decision makers. That creates complete disarray within the Hezbollah system, the Iranian system, and that gives you the time to take out the essential systems. So today, Iran's problem is not so much that they don't have enough ballistic missiles. They do. They don't have enough launchers because Israel took them out, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's dive into the details, and let's highlight the basic assumptions. And some of them may sound counterintuitive to you. So the first basic assumption is this: Israel alone cannot end Iran's nuclear program militarily. Don't take it from me. Take it from Yoav Gallant, who just said it yesterday, former Minister of Defense. Take it from Ehud Barak, who just said it on CNN a few days ago. He even went as far as saying that even the United States cannot end the program militarily today. I'm assuming they know what they're talking about. But the day before, the day the war started, Israel's national security advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, went on Israeli television and said exactly that. All right? So this is a very basic, fundamental thing. I know there's a lot of people out there, especially people that love Israel and care about Israel deeply, that are convinced that Israel can take out the nuclear program militarily alone. According to these experts, this is not going to happen. This is not something that Israel can do. They all recommend that a United States intervention is needed. And even then, there are no guarantees. But this is the first basic assumption that we have to accept. The second, contrary to media reports, there is a significant daylight between Israel and the United States on the issue of Iran. It's not that Trump and Netanyahu see eye to eye the entire thing. And what is the difference? The difference is when it comes to the goals of the operation. Right? When Israel started the war, we said, and here you can see three separate issues here, right? Taking out Iran's nuclear program, crippling Iran's conventional military capabilities, bringing about a regime change. These are three different things. So when Israel entered the war, it was declared that the goal is number one, taking out the nuclear program. Then Israeli decision makers, once the Iranians responded, started talking about we also need to cripple the conventional capabilities of the Iranians. And then number three, bringing about a regime change. All three purposes, all three goals were discussed publicly by Israeli decision makers. All you have to do is go and look for those references in the Israeli media. Well, this is not what President Trump has in mind. President Trump would like to take out the nuclear program. And he would like to take out the nuclear program in such a way that will not get him in trouble. We'll talk about what it means in a second. So there are different assessments as to the meaning of Iran's nuclear threat and the motivation behind it. The way Israel sees it is something that we can all relate to, right? Post 10-7, Israel is going to be more vigilant. We just spoke about it. Listen to your enemies carefully. One of the biggest mistakes that Israel made on 10-7 is that we didn't listen to what Hamas was saying. Here you have a country, Iran, that not only masterminded 10-7 and Israel and attacked Israel twice, but also is the only country in the world. Think about it. There are 193 members in the United Nations. Only one member, Iran, is calling for the complete destruction of another member, Israel. You have 193 members of the United Nations. Only one member is officially denying the Holocaust, holding conferences, scientific conferences in Tehran every year to deny the Holocaust, right? Only one member is the foremost sponsor of terrorism in the world, Iran. Iran is cultivating tens of different terrorist groups, Shiites, Sunnis, doesn't matter. They play the game, destabilizing for the sake of destabilizing regimes. They do it all over the world, in North Africa, in Eurasia, in Latin America. They're responsible for attempts to carry out terrorist attacks, even on American soil. I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu alluded to it when he spoke about the attempts on Mr. Trump's life. But we know that they're connected to the attacks on the Jewish community in the Israeli embassy in Argentina and so on and so forth. So the other thing that Israel is looking at is what the world is willing to do to take out Iran's nuclear threat, right? So this is the way Israel sees it. We are alone. Nobody's going to help us. We are the main target of Iran's nuclear program, and therefore, when it's the last minute, we have to take action. This is the way the Israelis see it, and this is the narrative that the Israelis are telling themselves about what's happening. Now, there's a different view, which you will hear more from the Europeans. You will hear it more from the New York Times. When I just read a story about the New York Times before I started this session, that their concern is that the Iranians will attack American installations. Do you know how many American military installations you have in the world? It never had, no superpower in the history of the world had so many military installations all over the world like the United States. You have over 250 military bases all over the world. So the New York Times is concerned not with the fact that Iran, the most dangerous regime in the world, will have access to the most dangerous weapon in the world. They're concerned that the Iranians will fire ballistic missiles against American targets. That's why the war in Iran is wrong in the eyes of the New York Times. All right? So there are different ways to look at it. Here's a way to look at it, which you will hear from many Europeans and possibly many North Americans. And according to this narrative, it's a very different narrative than the Israeli narrative. Iran's nuclear program is actually not the invention of the Ayatollah regime. It started under the Shah with the help of the United States. It goes back to the 1950s, which was around the same time Israel started developing its own nuclear program, according to the international press. And because of Iran's unique position within the Muslim world, the motivation is actually much larger than Israel. In other words, Iran's aspiration to become nuclear is not about Israel, really. There are 1.4 billion Muslims in the world. 85% of them are Sunnis. Only 15% of them are Shiites. Of the 15% Shiites, 75% live in Iran, meaning Iran is the largest Shiite country in the world. The second largest Shiite country in the world, Azerbaijan, which is Iran's neighbor to the north, is also one of their biggest enemies. In other words, Iran is acting not only out of weakness, but also as a completely isolated, at least in their state of mind, a completely isolated country that has dreams of restoring its glory days, right, as an empire, the Persians. And they're really, the purpose of Iran's nuclear program is not to annihilate Israel, but rather to achieve regional hegemony. Now, since the Ayatollah regime took over in 1979, the real enemy became Moderna. Just like any other Islamist regime, which is fundamentalist, meaning interested in the past, not so much in the future, Iran's Ayatollah regime is in the first place anti-Western, anti-American, because America is the number one representative of Moderna, and by definition also anti-Israel. In other words, the motivation is because of the internal Islamic divide. Israel is not even in the top 3 targets of Iran. That's a different narrative, a different perspective to look at what's happening. So if you buy into that narrative, then you question Israel's motivations of attacking Iran in this particular timing. And here I gave you the 2 main dominant narratives to look at what's happening. Now, what's happening next? So we are entering the 7th day of the war, and it's already clear what Iran is trying to do. They lost the number 1 asset, which is their air defense system. As I mentioned before, Iran is completely exposed to Israeli attacks from the air. So what is their answer? Their answer is to introduce a different kind of what we call munition economy, meaning they're firing less missiles every day, trying to drag Israel into a war of attrition. Lower intensity works for Iran, doesn't work for Israel. Why doesn't it work for Israel? Because I want you to think about it. Israel's pilots have to fly 3 hours each direction. Right? Iran is a vast country. It's almost the size of Alaska. It's 4 times the size of California, right? It's a big country. So Israel's pilots have to fly 3 hours, get there when they're in full concentration, deliver, perform at the highest level, and they have to do it every day, all day. Right? No, we don't have military bases near Iran. We don't have an aircraft carrier, right? We don't have the Harry Truman or the USS Nimitz or the Vinson. We don't have that. The Americans have that, right? So Israeli Air Force is overstretched. So the Iranians understand that, and they say, okay, this is the way to do it. Let's lower the intensity of the attacks, drag Israel into a war of attrition. Imagine every day they fire a ballistic missile is a complete disruption to Israel's economy. We have only 1 international airport and it's closed. You know, here where I live, we still have places that are open. I can go to the doctor. I can go to the supermarket. In Tel Aviv, once they're in the greater Tel Aviv area, once the Iranians fire a missile, everything shuts down. So it's a major disruption to Israeli economy, major disruption to life, not to mention the risk to people. We already lost nearly 30 people that were killed in the attacks. So that's clearly what Iran is trying to do. Drag Israel into a war of attrition mode. What Israel wants to do is to get the Americans involved for the reasons I mentioned before. We don't have the right munition to bring to an end the Iranian nuclear program. All right, we'll talk about the hesitation of the Americans in a second. Right? So Israel's air superiority can be maintained, but at a very high cost, because the IDF is overstretched, as I mentioned. Another factor is, of course, Israel is a democracy, unlike Iran, which means that the home front, the Israeli civilians, after a while, will at one point express their dissatisfaction with the situation. In other words, unlike what's happening in Gaza, where the Israelis, Gaza is right here in our backyard, here the Israelis want to see results. They want to see what is the end game, right? So here you have two conflicting motivations. Iran wants to prolong it. Israel needs a quick, swift victory. And in order for Israel to be able to do that, Israel needs the United States. Now, one word about regime change, and I spoke about it. Those of you who had a chance to see me on television, I was on Fox News and Newsmax and ABC and NBC, and I spoke in all the interviews about the theory of unintended consequence, which usually happens to governments and large corporations. You do one thing hoping that it will produce A, but actually it produces B. Here's the danger with proclaiming that the goal of this military operation is to bring about a regime change. It may actually backfire, because even those who disagree with the regime, when they feel that their national pride, and the Iranian people are a very proud nation, when they feel humiliated that their national pride was hit, it may actually create the opposite impact. It will galvanize people around this very dangerous, very negative, very toxic regime in the first place for the Iranian people themselves. And then, of course, you have the Trump factor. What's the story with Donald Trump? Here's the story. First, we have to understand his political brand. He said it in his inauguration speech. He said it many times after his inauguration speech. He's not here to start new wars. He's here to end wars. However, I met a friend, and I hope she's on the call today. In August of last year, she attended a fundraiser for Donald Trump with about 40 people in an apartment in Manhattan. This is in August of 2024. And this friend of mine asked him about Iran, and he made a commitment to that group, all Jews. Iran will not become nuclear. Right? He made that commitment. He said, read my lips, Iran will never have nuclear weapons. So on the one hand, he doesn't want to be remembered as someone who started a new war. On the other hand, he is committed to prevent Iran from becoming nuclear. So what's the solution? I believe the solution is to let the Americans deploy the bunker busters, limited airstrikes, no boots on the ground. Make it clear that it's not going to be any ground operation. I add to that the fact that he's very sensitive to the division within his own political camp between the isolationists, people like Tucker Carlson, and others, right? So he's very sensitive to that. Add to the fact that he's very concerned with the impact this could have on global economy, right? Not just the oil prices, supply chain issues, and so on and so forth. We already mentioned the possibility of Iranians targeting American military assets throughout the region, especially in Eurasia and in the Middle East. Unforeseen military complications. I'm sure he's thinking of President Carter, if you remember the failed rescue operation in Iran. And don't forget that everybody's talking about the particular site called Fordow, when we're being told that the Iranians built tunnels that go 800 meters underground. So former Prime Minister Ehud Barak said on CNN that he doesn't think that even the Americans have the right munition to be able to eliminate from the air the apparatus that was built in Fordow, which means that maybe you will need at one point to deploy ground forces, several divisions, to Fordow, take over the area for a limited amount of time, take out the nuclear capabilities physically on the ground, and get it over with. So Mr. Trump has many, many things to consider, and we're being told that it will be his decision and that he will be making that decision in the next 2 weeks. I'm afraid that if he's going to take that time to make that decision, it will be too late. Because again, as I mentioned before, the Iranians are acutely aware of the fact that the Israeli Air Force is overstretched, and you'll see why in a second. Let's talk about Iran for a second. A lot of people don't even understand what we're dealing with here. So we're talking about a country which is about the size of Alaska. They learned the lesson of the Iraqis and the Syrians. Both Iraq and Syria tried to develop nuclear capabilities. Both of them made a terrible mistake, and they created the whole program in one location, thus allowing, according to the international press, allowing Israel to take out that one location. In Iraq, it was in Iraq, in Syria, in 1981, in 2006. They learned from that. And their decision was to actually create a system where the program is scattered around, and I'm showing you now the Iranian arsenal of ballistic missiles, the range of those ballistic missiles, and the most important thing is look at how scattered the program is, right? So imagine this is the size of Alaska, a little bit smaller than Alaska, 4 times the size of California, right? And in order for that, according to the international press, this is what Israel has, right? This is according to Data and Forensics website. 75 aircrafts F-15, 200 F-16, and about 40 F-35. Israel doesn't even have one major bomber like the Americans do, right? Now you understand the military challenge for Israel. Now, before we open this for your questions, I'd like to leave you with some questions. First question is, where was diplomacy since Prime Minister Netanyahu returned to the Prime Minister's office in 2009? What happened on the diplomatic front, right? Another question, how come Israel is entering this phase, perhaps the most important war since 1948 in Israel's history? How come we're entering this phase when we are almost completely isolated in the Western world? How did that happen? Right? And lastly, a question. What are we going to do with the Western world becoming softer and softer, looking at the deployment of power as illegitimate? We spoke about it before, not just military power, even police power. You're looking at people that see the deployment of power as something that is 100% illegitimate. What are we going to do with that? These are three very big questions that we have to ask ourselves when we discuss what's happening here. This is the power structure in Iran, and you can see that there are two different military arms. You have the army right here, and then you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which was founded right after the revolution. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard has only one purpose, which is the exportation of the Islamic Revolution throughout the region and throughout the world. Let me end with an assessment of a leading Israeli commentator. You may disagree with it, but I want you to listen to this because it makes a lot of sense. Israel is not built for a war of attrition against Iran. Its stock of weapons and interceptors is limited. Its reserve forces are stretched to the limit. Its economy is at risk, and its home front is vulnerable. It is clear to everyone that Israel is fighting against the clock and expending its attacks to bring about rapid escalation and international intervention. This is not happening so far. While the Iranian enemy is restraining itself to play for time. So what do we want to achieve? If the intention is to eliminate Iran's nuclear capability, there is a consensus that American military capability is required for this. If the goal is to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime, Israel needs endurance that is conditional on American involvement. And if the goal is to force an arrangement on Iran that will withdraw its capabilities, American assistance is also required. In other words, by going to war against Iran at this particular point, Israel took a risk. Some people say a calculated risk. We may win, we may not. It really depends on the will of the United States at this point. Thank you so much, and I think we are ready to handle your questions, please.
Ido, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so somebody wants to know, could you just explain what you mean by war of attrition?
Yeah, war of attrition is a low-intensity war. It means that you don't engage in high-intensity attacks. Instead of firing 50 to 100 ballistic missiles, high intensity is what the Iranians did in April and October of 2024 when they fired together over 500 ballistic missiles and drone. That's very high intensity. And low intensity is 5 missiles a day, 2 missiles a day. One day, I don't fire missiles like today. The other day, I am firing 1 missile just to disrupt. That's low intensity. That's war of attrition.
Great, thanks.
It's something, the idea is to prolong the military effort and to turn it into some sort of a part of the normal routine. Israel was involved in a war of attrition right after the 6-day war. A lot of people don't talk about it. But 68, 69 with the Egyptians, also a little bit with the Syrians, war of attrition. And every day, Israeli soldiers were killed. Again, you didn't read about it in the American media, it didn't make it to the front page. But in Israel, it was slow bleeding of the Israeli army, right? 68, 69, war of attrition.
Great, thank you. And before we get to the many questions, in general, how are the Israelis doing? How's the psyche, the national psyche?
So I'm sure you all know that Israelis are very resilient. I always say that Israelis are making a perfect case for what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, meaning not only the Israelis are able to uh, withstand pressure, they actually thrive under pressure, right? It brings out the best of the society and improves. And so I think that's what you're seeing today. However, we've never seen such devastation in our cities. I remember as a young journalist, I covered the first Gulf War, 39 Scud missiles fired by Saddam Hussein. They were outdated, they were not really that damaging. The Scud missiles of 1991 were 250 kilos of explosives. They're firing 1 tons of explosives and very sophisticated types of missiles, which we've never seen before. So, and one of the reasons we're unable to intercept all of them like we did in 2024 is because our aircrafts are deployed in Iran. And so all it takes is, instead of 98% interception ratio, to go down to 92%. That's the whole difference. That's the damage that you see. And Israeli aircrafts are deployed elsewhere.
And speaking of damage, that leads to David's question. He said it's hard to get a full idea in mainstream media of the destruction in Israel from the missiles from Iran. Do you have any idea how many buildings have been destroyed or damaged?
So far, at least 20 buildings. Some of them is the Weizmann Institute of Science, the Soroka Hospital this morning. You know, in Ramat Gan, major buildings were, and when a 1 ton of the most sophisticated explosives in the world is hitting your building, that's it. And so, yeah, tens of buildings were affected. Thank God, because of the fact that Israeli home front is more or less, a lot of people that don't have safe rooms, but most people do. And those who have safe rooms and those who follow the instructions, it really prevents damage. And so as painful as it is, we lost almost 30 people so far. It could have been much worse. There were reports in the Israeli media that the Israeli government, going into this operation in Iran, was discussing the possibility of Israeli home front enduring up to 4,000 fatalities. 4,000. The scenarios, the worst case scenarios that involve earthquakes, for example, talk about 16 to 20,000 fatalities in Israel. Right? So these are the numbers people are talking about. We're not even close to those numbers. But again, the key is to end this war quickly, and the key is the Americans.
And so Stephen wants to know, if the US declines to get involved, what, in your view, is the end game?
So I think that it's very dangerous to talk about regime change. You can hope for regime change deep in your heart, but it's reckless and irresponsible for Israeli leaders to talk about it. Why? Because of the fact that it may produce exactly the opposite. The opposition in Iran is not only from the left, there's also opposition from the right. And remember, the people that oppose the regime, women, and then we have a few women, I see the names on the call that were born in Tehran on this call right now, like my dear friend Seppi. I see her asking a question. We have to remember that the opposition is powerless. It's women, it's the youth, and the trade unions, the organized workers. These are traditionally the three groups that are opposing the regime. They're powerless. They don't have military power. They're not organized. You have the Savak, you have the Secret Service, the secret agents on the streets, sanctioning opposition to the regime. It's very difficult. So we have to be very careful. In my view, what we need to do is to focus on inflicting harm on Iran's nuclear program, right? It's too late to discuss whether the nuclear program is indeed designed to inflict harm only on Israel, or is it designed to improve the positioning of Iran within the world of Islam? It's irrelevant today because they're very close to enrich enough uranium to produce an operational bomb. Now it's the time to stop it. And again, in order for it to happen, Israel needs the United States. I will let historians answer the question of why Israel did this without a guarantee from the United States that they're going to intervene. Right? What we're discovering now is that Israel went for this war without a solid guarantee from President Trump that he will intervene. That's a question for historians to ask.
Okay. The next question, Ido, does Israel also have guided missiles they can use against Iranian targets rather than relying on the live Israeli pilots flying long-range strenuous missions? Doesn't Israel's Navy have a destroyer and submarine capable of launching numerous missiles?
Yeah, Israel has very impressive ballistic missiles capabilities, but for the purpose of what Israel is trying to do now, attacking surgically targets that are related to the Ayatollah regime apparatus, the best thing is to deploy the airplanes. And when we know, look at how effective Israel was. On the first day of the war, Israel basically took out all the relevant decision makers, which I don't think is precedented really in the history of modern warfare, to be able to do such a thing to a sovereign country 2,000 kilometers away, right? So, but Israel has very impressive other capabilities which are not being deployed yet. And I don't think that we will have to deploy them because remember, Iran is totally exposed.
Right.
The challenge is how to maintain the dominance from afar. That's the challenge. And remember, you're sitting in think of it, I want you to think of the Israeli pilot, okay? They're sitting in a tiny cockpit, 3 hours each direction. They have to refuel in midair. And then when they get there, they can't even think about what if they need to pee? What if they need to go to the bathroom? Think about those things, right? What do you think about the human in the cockpit? And then they get there after 3 hours in this tiny cockpit. This is not flying business class on United. Then they have to be 100% in full concentration, performing at the highest level. Right? It's not easy. And they have to do it every day, all day. How long can you do that?
Wow.
I want you to think about the human factor here.
Thank you for giving us that.
And the Iranians are acutely aware of that. They're acutely aware of that. And I'm not sure President Trump is acutely aware of that.
Wow. Wow, thank you for that perspective. Bob wants to know who is helping Iran.
Well, so far, Iran was actually on the side that is helping others, right? Iran was supplying Russia with missiles, but from technological perspective, North Korea is an ally. Of course, there's spillover of Chinese technologies. There's a symbiosis with Russia, obviously. Iran doesn't have too many friends in the world. That's one of the reasons they wanted to become nuclear. They wanted to become untouchable. Once you become nuclear, think about Pakistan, think about North Korea, you become untouchable. If Ukraine still had nuclear weapons, none of this would have happened to Ukraine. Think about it. That's the logic of Iran. They want to become untouchable.
Oh. Okay, Iran said a U.S. lawmaker said earlier today that Iran already has nuclear weapons. Could you comment about this?
I'm not privy to those intelligence reports. It makes sense. They could. It's not that difficult once you have the knowledge. And remember, even if Israel destroys the actual facility, you still haven't destroyed the knowledge. The knowledge exists. So it may be a setback. You may take them back several years, but if the regime is in place, they will resume the efforts to recreate the program, and they will eventually. The thing is, you have to sanction them for their motivations.
Mhm.
By the way, this was the big debate. A lot of people misunderstood the debate between Israel and the Obama administration. Obama said, let me reach an agreement. He approached it like an attorney. He said, let me reach an agreement that will prevent the Iranians from producing one bomb or two bombs or whatever. And Israel said, yeah, it's not important. What's important is the motivation. Right? Today it's nuclear, tomorrow it can be biological warfare. If the Iranian regime is not sanctioned for all the things that they've done wrong, for lying to the international community, for doing this, for doing that, we have to punish them. If you don't punish them in the Middle East, that you send the wrong message. And to prove the point, people don't see the connection. President Obama, if you remember, his response to the news that came out of Syria at the time, that Bashar al-Assad was using chemical weapons against his own people. His response in 2013 was, that's a red line. If you cross that red line, there'll be repercussions. And it was proven to him that he crossed the red line and there were no repercussions. Do I have to remind you what happened shortly thereafter?
Right.
Putin invaded Crimea in 2014. There's a direct link. This is the language. And again, when you become risk averse, when you display what is perceived in the Middle East as weakness, then it's contagious. I have a friend who used to say, paraphrasing what Atlas Stevenson said, weakness corrupts, and absolute weakness corrupts absolutely.
Oh.
Right? You cannot project weakness in our part of the world. It's one of the reasons the Israeli government did what it did, taking that risk. And we did take a risk.
Okay. You want to keep going with questions?
Yes, of course.
Great. Okay.
Don't forget, as long as the Iranians are allowing us, we can speak all night. I mean, I'm here. Where am I going to go?
Okay. Hopefully they won't bother you. Wendy and Alan, there are no reports of various Arab nations condemning Israel. Please comment on this.
Yes, of course. Why would they condemn Israel? Everybody hates Iran. Even the German chancellor said that Israel is doing the dirty work for the world. Everybody's happy. Nobody likes Iran. Iran is a bad actor.
Okay. How about this one? Why hasn't Israel developed their own bunker busting bomb?
That's a question of priorities. It's a good question. I'm assuming Israel was relying on the United States for that. And I think that the Israeli decision makers are kind of surprised and disappointed, probably, if you ask me, that President Trump did not act swiftly and quickly and decisively against Iran. And I think that this is the sentiment in Israel. Israelis are surprised, and as the days go by and there's no American intervention, also disappointed.
So this Dawn's question couldn't be more timely then. Do you believe Mr. Trump's 2-week time frame is simply an effort to give Iran a false sense of comfort and a U.S. assisted attack could happen at any time within this time period?
I hope so. I say this is an Israeli. This ends only with the American intervention. Israel cannot end this alone.
Wow.
So again, I leave it to the historians to determine why Israel's government did this without a solid commitment from the Americans. It's a big question. Big question.
Wow. Okay. Are the recent Iranian missiles using cluster munitions?
Yes, according to reports, again, I don't have any intelligence, but according to reports, that's exactly what happened yesterday.
Okay. Bernie Schuster writes, for the day after, Professor Kadar insists that we must negotiate with the various clans. They control Gaza and others in Iran. There's no loyalty to a country or regime. How realistic is this?
Yes, I think that this speaks to the tribal nature of our region. It's true. And we spoke about it here that our region, North Africa, Middle East, even Eurasia, was designed by the powers in late 19th century, early 20th century, completely disregarding tribal affiliation, ethnicities, and even religious affiliations. And you can even see that when you open the map, they took a ruler, right? In Munich and in Sykes-Picot, they just took a ruler and they arbitrarily just drew the boundaries. And of course, we're all paying the price for it. Take a country like Iraq that doesn't really have any reason to exist as Iraq, right? You have Sunnis and Shiites and the Kurds in the north. Take a country like Lebanon, dysfunctional since its very inception because of its tribal nature. So I think that what Professor Kadar was referring to is the need to go back and talk to the various clans. This is something that Israel did right after the 1948 war, when it started talking directly to the heads of the families, heads of the clans. It worked. It held until the first Intifada, when in December of 1987, when the younger generation actually defied the authority of their parents and grandparents and actually started operating outside the realm of the clan, of the family, of the tribe.
Wow, thank you, Ido. And everyone, thank you. Your questions are wonderful, and they continue. Is there a way to eliminate the Fordo nuclear facility by using the B-2 aircraft America has sent to avoid boots on the ground?
So there are two ways to do it. One is to try with the bunker busters. Again, I'm told it's 800 meters underground. It doesn't have to be, by the way, straight underground. I'm being told it's built into a mountain. So it may be even more difficult. If it's 800 meters into a mountain, not going straight underground, it's even bigger challenge for the bunker busters. And the way the bunker buster works, as you know, is first it drills a hole, and then through the hole, the explosion follows, and it plays on the weakness of concrete. So it can be the most sophisticated concrete in the world, but if you penetrate it first, it becomes very, very doable. So that's the first scenario. You can use it and then assess if you inflicted damage or not. But there's always the possibility of temporarily taking over that piece of land, that mountain, landing ground forces, which is something that Israel could do as well, by the way, given the air superiority of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Israel could, in theory, deploy a parachute 2 or 3 divisions for a very short period of time to go in with explosives and take out the entire mountain. Could happen.
That was
And
one
I'm
of the
sure
questions.
and I'm
Yeah.
sure that some people are planning this. It's part of the planning. But again, I think that this is a big concern for President Trump. He doesn't want that to happen, doesn't want to have boots on the ground.
Okay. How are the hospitals coping with the massive amount of people entering their facilities?
So in Beersheba, as you know, Soroka was hit directly. So Asuta, which is a neighboring hospital, is compensating for it. But here, remember, Israel is a tiny country. It takes 30 minutes to move a patient from Beersheba to Tel Aviv by helicopter. So, in that department, we have an advantage.
Okay. Um, can Israel nuke Fordo if the US does not intervene?
Well, you don't use nuclear weapons for one specific site like that. And I don't think that Israel will change its longstanding policy of not being the first to introduce nuclear weapons to the Middle East, which was introduced by David Ben-Gurion in 1961 at the famous meeting he had with JFK in New York, when JFK was asking him about Israel's alleged nuclear program. That was Ben-Gurion's answer, and it still holds until this very day as Israel's official policy. Israel will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons to the Middle East. I don't think that's going to change.
Okay. Um, Ellie wants to know, I heard reports that Chinese delivery planes coming into Iran were turning off the aircraft's transponders. Are they resupplying Iran with ballistic missiles or other munitions? Do you know?
I don't have any information about that, but if they do, again, remember, the key is not to look at the number of ballistic missiles. The key is to look at the number of launchers. Because if you don't have the launcher, the ballistic missiles are useless. So Israel's, if you ask me, brilliantly, is targeting the launchers. And I believe that they eliminated already 2/3
Wow.
of the launchers that Iran has.
Okay. And Stephen wants to know, Ido, what in your view should Israel do now?
Try to
Mm,
understand Mr. Trump's psychology, play to his psychology, and I know that Mr. Trump is surrounded by many people that love Israel deeply, and they're trying to convince him to do the right thing. But let me put it very bluntly: if the United States does not intervene, this whole exercise may backfire on Israel.
oh, ooh. Okay, you want to keep going? I want to respect your time. It's the middle of the night.
Yeah, no, I'm
Keep
fine.
going? Okay. What about possible nuclear fallout if the big bomb is used?
Again, these are all hypothetical questions. I don't know. I don't think it will be used.
Okay. Aaron wants to know, Ido, clearly from what you have shared with your wisdom, it is essential to destroy Iran's nuclear capability. If that indeed is done, would there be any predictable global downside, or would it make our world safer and more secure?
Well, I'm trying to avoid using terms like safer world and so on. It's true in theory, but in reality, you'll always have um, bad actors and bad elements, unfortunately. And I look at terrorism and even state-sponsored terrorism the same way I look at crime, right? We can try and eradicate crime, but crime will always be there because you'll always have people with bad nature, always have bad people. And same thing goes for countries. You always have bad actors. Unfortunately, Iran is one of those bad actors. Um, think about how cruel they are to their own people. Think about what they've done in Syria, working with the regime to suppress the people. And in Bahrain, exactly the opposite, with the people against the regime, right? So unfortunately, I don't see a long-term solution for that. Iran is a bad actor, and by the way, if you let's say I heard an Israeli decision maker foolishly talking about openly the need to eliminate the leader of Iran, Khamenei. Is there a guarantee that the person that will replace him will be better? No, there is no such guarantee. That's what I'm referring to when I use the term the theory of unintended consequence.
Right. Ido, this week, I think it was the former Shah of Iran, his son addressed the Iranian people. Did you see that? Did you hear that?
Yes, yes, yes.
First of all, wasn't that dangerous? Wasn't he risking his life? And did he do that from Iran or was he in
I
exile?
believe he's in Paris or something,
Oh,
but
he's in, okay, so that's how he was able to do it.
yeah. Of course, the family
Okay.
the family left Iran in '79, never to come back.
Yeah.
But again, it could happen. I don't see it happening. I think again, it's a very dangerous thing. Those things have to happen organically from within.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do happen, it's very difficult to predict this. No one could have predicted the downfall of Assad so quickly. It happened immediately, just like that.
It was
There's a
organic.
tipping point, and we can't design that tipping point. It has to be organic, has to be authentic, has to be grassroots.
So why is it?
Any external intervention could inflict more damage than good.
Okay. If you're willing to keep going, we have more questions. Should we be concerned at any point about Turkey or Pakistan or anyone else who hates Israel?
So again, luckily, this is not being perceived as about Israel. This is being perceived as about Iran, right? We always said that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has never been about a Palestinian state. It's always been about the Jewish state that bothers the world. And now we see with what is happening on American campuses that it's true, right? Same thing
Right.
now on the other side. It's about Iran.
Right.
Nobody likes Iran. Nobody likes Iran.
Okay.
Turkey hates Iran. Everybody, Iran has no friends. Imagine that they were able to pick a fight with the second largest Shiite country in the world, Azerbaijan. It's a very strange, bizarre political system that the Ayatollah regime created. Highly unpopular, totally isolated, totally paranoid, and as it turns out, not very effective.
Right. Okay. Let's do just a few more. How are your defensive Iron Dome arrow sling rockets supplies holding up?
So each has a different purpose. Each has a different radius. Each of the systems that were mentioned has a very high price tag. Obviously, these are all things that are being factored in. And when I say that the Israeli army is overstretched, I also refer to that system as well. There's a limit to how much money we can invest in the air defense system and for how long we can do that. But I know that the United States is supplying Israel very generously with munitions.
And a couple more. Why do you think Trump does not want Khomeini eliminated?
I don't think he thinks it's I think instinctively he thinks that this could backfire, and I agree with it. I agree with him. I think that that he's handling this so far very good. I think that if he ends up not intervening militarily, it's going to be a mistake of historical proportions.
Okay. Two more. You mentioned Saudi Arabia is the holy grail of the Middle East. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia replaced basically Egypt as the most important country in the Arab world. Iran is not part of the Arab world. Turkey is not part of the Arab world. They're part of the Muslim world. They see themselves as different, separate civilizations, even. And the reason why Saudi Arabia is becoming so important is not just because it's so wealthy. It's because it has a strategy in place. And the strategy is to become part of the Western world by transitioning their economy from natural resource economy to knowledge economy. And they have a leader who's committed to it. The leader has a long-term strategy. He has the means to execute the strategy, and he has a desire to execute the strategy. That's what turns Saudi Arabia into such an important country. And you will see then in a decade or two, Saudi Arabia will become one of the most important countries in the world, my prediction.
Wow.
Because strategy takes you a long way in the world. Countries that have strategies, meaning they're planning not for tomorrow, they're planning for 100 years from now. They have the advantage.
Right.
Look at
And
Sweden. Sweden is a perfect example. A lot of people talk about startup nation, startup nation. Look at Sweden.
Mhm.
It's a country the same population as Israel, far more advanced than Israel. They're the real startup nation, not Israel.
Wow.
Look at how many massive brands came out of Sweden. Right? They have global brands, enormous economic power. One of the most important countries in the world, only 11 million people. And we're bragging about startup nation. Look at Sweden. We should aspire to become like Sweden. Right? Why Sweden is so successful? Someone, when they designed the system over there, was thinking 100 years forward. Why was Theodor Herzl so effective? Because he had a strategy, had a vision. He was talking about 50 years from now, 100 years from now. Same thing with the United States. When the young Alexis de Tocqueville was traveling in the 1830s, he predicted America will become a superpower because he saw the principles, the guiding principles, the strategy for the future. Unfortunately, we don't have too many strategists leading the world today. It's a very, very sad statement.
So interesting. Thank you for that. And Ido, we will end with this question from Susan on a different topic. What's happening with the hostages still in Gaza?
So, interestingly enough, what's happening in Iran could actually help advance a deal with Hamas. Because remember, you hit the head of the snake. You hit the head of the snake. Hamas was operating with the notion that they have the backing of Iran. If Iran is gone out of the equation, if Iran is hit, then it's much easier to cut the deal with Hamas. So I think actually, and I've read some reports that they're making progress with Hamas about the release of their hostages, and let's just pray that this happens sooner than later. And again, thank you so much from Jerusalem to all my friends all over the world, especially in Canada and the United States. I want to thank also the Canadian friends of the Hebrew U that co-sponsored this event. And I see my dear cousin Edie Parker from